It's a very welcome return indeed for Oliver Wakeman. Hello again, Oliver.
Hello, thank you for inviting me back. I obviously didn't upset too many people last time. That's a good start.
Yes, indeed. And we'd love to talk to you today about Dark Fables and Tales from Gaslight and Inventioning and the multi-award-winning Yendor soundtrack and much more. So Mark's going to kick off with the first question.
Hello there, Oliver. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm slightly nervous now.
Oh, nothing to be nervous about. Come on, it's just us. So the first question will be a nice and easy one to start off with.
Okay.
Clearly, you have been very busy since we spoke last when you were here for the From a Page release.
Yeah.
Your latest release is Dark Fables. How about you tell us about what's on that collection?
Yeah, well, Dark Fables, I'd probably jump back into the box set which preceded it in March, which was the Tales by Gaslight box set. Back in, my very early days, it actually sandwiched between the album I did with Steve Howe back in 2001. I did a couple of albums with Clive Nolan, who is probably best known for playing with bands like Arena and Pendragon. And we got in touch through a mutual friend, which was Mick Pointer. I used to work on a radio show many years ago, and Mick Pointer turned up to talk about his new band, Arena. And so I did the usual thing that Marillion fans do, is I went through my record collection, dug out a couple of old 12-inch vinyls that he was on and took them up for him to sign. And he said, you should come and meet Clive, my keyboard player. So I just phoned up Clive and he said, come on up to the house, come and stay for a weekend and we'll chat and talk. And so we got chatting, and this was back in about 97. And we talked about doing some work together. And so we created a sort of rock opera album called Jabberwocky. And we invited various guests to be on it. From my, people that I'd worked with or that I'd known, and people that Clive knew. And so we ended up working with some great people. Peter Banks played the guitar on the record, which was amazing for me. And then we also had my dad. My Clive said to me, "What about your dad?" And I said, "Well, I don't really want him playing on the record. We're already two keyboard players. We don't really need a third person cluttering up the old thing." So I suggested, well, we sort of talked about, what about if he was the narrator? Yeah. So he ended up narrating it for us. And then we sort of invited a few other people that Clive had worked with over the years, like Tracy Hitchings. And we also then, Tony Fernandez, who was Dad's drummer for many years, said to me, if you ever want to do a record and you want a drummer, give me a call. I'd love to play. And so he came on board, and I'd also known Bob Catley from interviewing him on the radio station and phoned him up, and he was keen to come along and sing. And suddenly, before we knew it, we had quite a cast. And the album came together and came out in 99 and sold out pretty much immediately, and then repressed and was sort of really well regarded, and then sort of disappeared as Clive went off and did Arena. And then we came together for a follow-up, which was called Hound of the Baskervilles, which we did in 2002, which we sort of increased the cast, and we ended up with Arjen Lucassen from Arjen on it. Peter Banks joined us again. Ashley Holt came along and wanted to sing a song. And we got Peter Brokownik to do loads of artwork. John Jarrett was on bass. Tony Fernandez came back, and we got Robert Powell doing the narration on this one. And so we ended up with another, big rock opera album, which was great. And so that came, and then we just ended up sort of getting busier in our own worlds, and we sort of disappeared out of each other's radar for a while. Clive went off and did Arena. I went off and did my own, started working that way. Then, of course, I disappeared off into the Yes world for 3 or 4 years, and then carried on working with Gordon Giltrap and other people, and then after the From a Page, which does get us to Dark Fables, after the From a Page release, the Yes management said, have you got anything else? Because From a Page seemed to hit a chord with people. Anything else you've got? And I mentioned that these 2 albums have been out of print. And they said, that sounds great, but have you got any extra music, anything else we could do that would make it an interesting box set? And so I got in touch with Clive and said, have you got any old demos or anything from the records? And he went, I don't think so. Let me have a look through my folders. And I did the same, both expecting to find maybe a few little bits and pieces, because we talked about doing a third album, but never got round to doing it.
Yeah.
And we sort of went through these folders and realised we'd actually written quite a lot of music and actually got it quite far developed, because as is often the way with musicians, you get excited about something and you start writing before you even realise whether there's any, output for it or any money involved. You just go, oh, great, that inspires you, and you get going. And so we ended up looking through this folder, and that's where Dark Fables came from. It basically came from that journey that we started back in 97. And then me sort of thinking that actually this would be a really nice thing to do the same way that we did From a Page, which was sort of collate the history of a project in a box. And so this was the sort of Nolan and Wakeman collection.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic. And I've really enjoyed listening to the whole of the box set this week as we prepared to speak to you, and I've enjoyed it all. I have to say my personal favourite is Jabberwocky, and that's partly because I have a small collection of Lewis Carroll books myself, including one called Jabberwocky, and also because of the music, the production and performances and so on. But can you tell us a bit more about working with Peter Banks in this way? Did you actually get to work with him in his studio?
Yeah, we worked with him in his studio. I actually met Peter. I'm just trying to think where I first met. I think I met him back in the late 90s. There was in the 2000s. There was the Classic Rock Society run by Martin Hudson.
Oh yeah,
and he was fantastic at getting people to come along to what they used to do each year, which was their award ceremony. And he invited Peter Banks one Christmas, and Peter turned up, and it was the same night that Steve Hackett's band were playing for the show. So I think Peter Banks came along to hand out some of the prizes, and Steve Hackett's band were playing. And I've got a lovely photograph of me, Martin, Peter, and Steve together. And at the end of the night, somebody said to Peter, "Well, why don't you get up and jam with Steve?" Right. And he went, "Yeah, all right then." And he just got up with the band and played. And I think it was probably the only time, Steve and Peter had ever played on stage together. And I don't know whether anybody ever recorded it, but it was great. It's one of those moments that you don't know what it was like musically, but for an atmosphere and a moment in history, it was great.
Yeah.
And so Peter and I sort of stayed in touch, and then Clive was also at the same awards thing, and we sort of all got talking. And then I think we just sort of said to Peter, "Look, would you be interested in playing some guitar on this?" Because he was doing a lot of his improvised stuff at the time. I think he was doing, I can't remember what the album he was working on, but he was looking at some of the re-releases of some of the old Flash stuff, and he was working on his album at the time. I'm trying to remember what it was, Harmony and Divergence, something like
Diversity,
that. Diversity, that was it. And so he was quite keen to come along. So we sort of sat in the studio with him, and he was great fun. We ended up socializing an awful lot, which we tended to do when we were writing these albums, because there was a pub down the road, and we'd often just go down there and chat. And he'd recently been remarried to a lady from South America, and he was in a really good place. He was really inspired, working, writing and performing some brilliant stuff. And so I have to apologise in the background. My little daughter has got a new microphone. She's just started the musical journey and insists on standing outside my office door singing into it. So if there's
not a problem at all.
If it comes through, I can tell her it's her first recording.
Yes.
So anyway, we spent a lot of time talking to Peter. But the one thing that Peter did, which was really great fun, was there was a song in the middle of Jabberwocky called Dangerous World, and there was also a track called Enlightenment. And Enlightenment had a huge, great, long guitar solo. I can't remember what it was, about 32 bars or something. We gave him this huge gap and said, "Look, let's just make a real thing of your guitar here." And he went, "Great." So we did what musicians always do in a studio. Said, "Right, there we go, start recording." And then what you generally do, for the musicians listening will know this, for the non-musicians, this is what we generally do, is you play something, somebody goes, "Oh, that bit was quite good." And you go, "Oh, great, you like that bit, did you?" And then you move on and you do another bit and you go, "Oh, that bit was quite good." And then you join them together and you slowly compose a solo or put together a solo.
Yeah.
And Peter would do a solo and we go, "Oh, that was brilliant. Really like that opening bit. Can you do that this time?" And then maybe change the next time round. Just see how it goes. And he'd go, "Yep, okay, got that." And then he'd go again and play something completely different. And you'd go, "Well, that was great, Peter, but the bit you did in the middle was fantastic. Could you do the first bit on the first one and the middle bit of the third one and put those together?" He'd go, "Righty-ho." And then he'd play something else again. Yeah. And he just did about 15 or 20 solos that were just great.
Yeah.
But there were so many magical moments on each bit. In the end, we ended up sort of having to collate this solo from. But he worked in this completely improvised way. You press go, and it was just what he felt at the time, and that's the thing that I mostly remember from working with Peter was his ability to do that. But the thing that there was two other little stories with Peter. He did one of my favourite solos, which was on the track Coming to Town, where he just played his beautiful jazz style of playing, just brilliantly. Came up with when you're working on a song, in your head, you've sort of got an idea of what you think a solo is going to be or how it's going to work. And he just came up with something that was just beyond my expectations. It was just absolutely perfect. And I loved that. And I remember when I was working with Steve Howe on the 3 Ages of Magic album, he said to me, "Oh, what else have you been working on?" I said, "Well, I put out the Jabberwocky album." And he said, "Oh, great, play me a bit of it." And I played it to him, and I said, "Oh, Peter Banks is playing guitar on it." And he sort of looked at me as in, "Oh, okay." And then he listened to it, and he went, "Is that Peter?"
Yeah.
And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "That's really good." And I always remember that because it was, I was sort of a little, obviously there's a lot of history between the Yes guitarists, and Steve was really complimentary about what Peter was doing. And I do remember years later in 2008 when we were putting together the tour for In the Present, when we were doing Astral Traveller, Steve was very keen at the time to actually say, "I'm going to finish my solo off with that lick that Peter does." He said, "I'm going to actually do that bit of Peter's because I think Peter deserves recognition for his part in the band in that song as we're playing, the track that Peter was on," which I thought was great, because you read a lot of stuff about, guitarists and how they feel about each other. And it was really nice to hear Steve, waxing lyrical about the stuff that Peter had done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So as always, I give you a long-winded answer to something.
No, that's fantastic.
Well, I mean, it's nice to hear that mainly because there was always that long-running story about the Union tour where he said that he was asking to come and do an encore of Roundabout with them, that apparently Steve Howe had somehow snuffed them into convincing him to not having him come up. So it's nice to hear that, that later on there's some, more positive thoughts towards each other in that capacity, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I just remember those things and thinking that's not, I mean, I think as I mentioned in the last interview we did, I'm not really very good at the politics. I just, I'm a musician that enjoys working with musicians, and that's the bit I generally focus on.
Exactly. So let's get back to some of the music then. So the Hounds of Baskerville has all sorts of wonderful performances on it, including, like you mentioned, Robert Powell.
Yeah.
It's inevitable that comparisons are going to be drawn, though, between your rock musicals and your father's, like Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah.
Were those classic pieces an inspiration to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult with Dad because, I just seem to like the same sort of stuff. I like reading historical books. I like reading stories. I like writing music to stories. And, he's older than me, so he gets to get there first. So
yes.
But I do, I generally did enjoy the work that he did. I didn't hear Journey until I was in my late teens, actually. I'd never heard it. I'd actually heard No Earthly Connection was the first one of Dad's that I'd heard.
Right.
And that was just because it was one that my mum had in the loft when my dad had moved out, and she gave it to me to listen to. And so No Earthly Connection is still my favourite album.
It's a great album.
And the other ones that I also had of his was Tomato, which is also one of my favorite Yes albums, which you often surprises a lot of people. So I generally I can't help liking story based music, and I like even if I write a short piece of music, I have to have a story behind it. There has to be a story or something that inspired me to write something. And Conan Doyle books are my favourite books. Jabberwocky was partly inspired because I'd written a lot of music around these characters, and Rodney Matthews' artwork just made it come to life. And so you kind of find yourself drawn to writing the music. I don't sort of sit down and say, right, what would Dad have done now? It's a bit like the Strawbs and Yes, fantastic bands, and I loved being a part of them. But I was always more grateful of the fact that they phoned me up and said, we think you'd be a good fit, rather than me sort of lobbying them and sending them watches through the post and saying, if you get a spot available, think of me. So it's a bit of I don't know, maybe there's a hereditary thing there, but it's what I enjoy doing. It's how I enjoy writing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the story elements to both of those works are fantastic. I really enjoy those a lot. And it does actually bring us to our next question, which is about this thing called Yendor, which I've very much enjoyed finding out about. I looked into it a little bit. Yeah. So you've done a soundtrack, it's described as, to this thing called Yendor by Rodney and Sarah Matthews. And Rodney's amazing artist, as we've just been talking about. But this isn't really a film soundtrack as such, is it?
Well, what it was, it started off as it was a book Rodney illustrated back in the 70s with a friend of his. And then Rodney said to me, he said, we're thinking of doing an audio book of this. He said, and what we'd really like to do, he said, Sarah's going to narrate the audio book. And what we can do is sell the book and put a CD in with the book of her reading the story. And I said, well, okay, what do you want from it? He said, what we'd like is maybe just a couple of incidental bits of music. You know, in the way audiobooks do, we read a paragraph and then you do a little 12-second bit that goes lumpty-dumpty-dum, dum-dee-dee-dee, and then we move on. And I went, okay, and put the phone down. I thought, those sort of things suck. I hate those sort of things because I like doing the big story things and stuff. So I managed to get hold of the copy of the book and looked at it and thought, actually, there's some really interesting characters in this book. And so I started writing themes based on the characters. And then sort of Sarah sent me her recording of it for me to put the bits in. And I didn't tell them. And they kept phoning me up and saying, we've only asked you to do 30 seconds of music. When are you gonna send it back to us? And I sort of went, oh yeah, any day now. And in the background, I was building this whole 17-minute soundtrack based on the book to the voices. And I think it was one Friday evening, they phoned me up and said, look, we don't mean to be rude, but we've got to go to press with this. What? Can you just send us the bits? And I said, look, I'm just going to send you something. Yeah. Please, have a listen. If I'm completely off the wall, tell me to, go away politely and I'll do what you want. And then I put the phone down and I waited for 20 minutes and then they just phoned me up and they just went, what have you done? And I said, do you like it? They went, it's fantastic. It tells the story of the book. Yeah. We got to try and make this into a film and get it animated. Yeah. So that's when they then turned it into an animated film. So they actually went along and animated the film to the soundtrack, which was obviously the wrong way round of doing it. But it just worked for me, the fact that the music could help inspire the idea of doing the animation. And I think that in their heads, they always wanted to do it as an animated story. But having the soundtrack there really helped, bring it to life, or got it, part way. So it sort of worked like that. But it was the same thing as always. You see something, you get inspired by it, and you go off the wall, rather than thinking, how does this, financially reward me? You just go, this is what this needs, and you do it. But
it's been incredibly successful, hasn't it? It's won several different awards.
It's done. I mean, I've been very grateful. It's won about 4 soundtrack awards, which was lovely, and the actual film itself has won countless other awards in lots and lots of festivals, and it was just really nice to be a part of it. And they want to do a follow-up, so they've asked me to sort of start looking at doing the music for the next one. So it's been a dream of Rodney since the 70s, a bit like, I think we talked about it briefly in the last interview about his Trinity record. It was one of his dreams. He spent so much of his life doing artwork for other people's projects. He was keen, as he's getting older, to start actually putting some of his own things that he's really wanted to do and bring them to life. And one of them was Trinity, which I was glad to be a part of. And the other one was bringing Yendor to life as a film. So I've been quite lucky that I've been invited to be involved in both of his, sort of lifelong ambitions, really. So but it's a lovely little film. Hopefully it will get some sort of terrestrial release soon. I know they're sort of pitching it to TV companies at the moment. So hopefully at some point soon it will become available. You can get hold of it actually they do the book and the CD package on their website. So it is available for people to hear, but they would really like to get it on TV, really.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So going on to your Yes work, there has already been 4 different keyboard players in the band prior to you joining the band. When you look back at your live work with the band, which of the other keyboard players' material did you find the most challenging to learn? And was there one style that suited your playing?
Oh god, well, Dad's stuff is quite complicated, but does seem, for some hereditary reason, seem to fit under my fingers quite comfortably. So it didn't. It was, you have to sit and learn it and get the dexterity up to play it. The difficulty, I think, learning a lot of the music from the Yes stuff was only having some CDs to listen to and no notes or no music or any separation. So all I could hear was literally what I could hear in the mixes. So it was trying to build everything from that, which was the biggest complication. And then the people's parts, it was kind of different, really, depending on. It was different for different people, I think, is the best way of saying it. With Dad, it was trying to get the dexterity of some of the fast passages and making sure that you didn't deviate too far from the bits that people would like to hear. So, the roundabout solo that I played is different in places to the roundabout solo that Dad played, but the majority of the key moments are there so that people still recognize it as the solo. And other bits, like on the Close to the Edge solo, just tidying that in a way that I could play it each night, as opposed to the live, the recorded version in the studio, which you record in the studio in a moment. You're trying to build it in a way that you can play it live. So they were quite challenging, but very rewarding and great when you play a show and it comes across well. Obviously, Jeff's stuff was less complex than some of Dad's parts, but Jeff did a way of layering soundscapes and parts together that was challenging in a different sort of way, trying to make sure you got the textural elements to things like Machine Messiah correct. So that was harder, and and you are moving from lots of pads and rhythmic keyboard parts, and you had to make sure you got a lot of nice. You obviously got the Moog and the Hammond stuff, but you also had to make sure you got some nice bright keyboard sounds that were on that track, which weren't particularly prevalent on a lot of previous Yesi records. So that was quite challenging. And Tony Kaye played, the Astral Traveller part is not a particularly complicated organ part, but because it's quite a staccato, continually flowing note part, the sort of main motif of Astral Traveller, the sort of da da dum da 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 dum da 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 dum da. Getting that bit played right was quite nice as well. And they're all little sections where you're just on your own playing, and so you obviously don't want to muck those up. So each player was slightly different. So for Jeff and Tony Kaye, it was probably trying to play in a slightly different way to how I would normally play. But great fun. I mean, it's day sitting there working out other Yes keyboard players' parts is better than any other day, isn't it? Really, you can't.
So, can you tell us about your process when you're preparing to play Yes songs live? How do you go about reproducing the keyboard sounds you need for particular songs?
So when I was looking at building the stuff in the set, it was quite complex, actually, because when I first joined the band, the rehearsals were in Canada. And I'd only met Chris about 2 weeks before I went out to Canada. He was in London. I met up with him in a pub with Steve, and we just talked about it. And I had a couple of weeks before I went out to Canada where they told me what the set list was. So I had to sort of sit at home and try and work everything out. Obviously, I was working over in Canada, so it made more sense to sort of build a keyboard rig out there rather than take a load of stuff from the UK. So I took some stuff that I had from the UK and got some equipment into Canada for the rehearsals. So I sort of didn't actually start putting the sounds for the set together until I had the rig set up in Canada. So it was really sort of tricky because I had to work everything out in the UK on a few keyboards. And then, of course, I was working to the original records, but then Steve phoned me up and said, "Oh, by the way, we want you to play all the parts that were on the original records." And I said, "Well, that's not a problem." He said, "But we want you to play all the original parts in the live arrangements that we've been using for the last 20 years. And I said, "Okay, do they exist anywhere?" And he went, "No." So, okay, so I had to sort of learn the tracks twice. So I had something like Roundabout that has slightly different arrangements to the original version, but so you ended up having to sort of magpie and remember to play bits in certain places in different ways. And then, so of course, I turned up in Canada and I was sort of meeting Alan for the first time since I was about 5. I'd only met Chris once before. Steve, obviously, I knew quite well. Benoit and I met on the day, and I met my keyboard tech for the first time, who said, "Oh, here's a load of new keyboards." And it was like, okay, right. So what I had to do was try and find a mixture of sounds that would work across the entire set. And bearing in mind, our first set was 3.5 hours, and we sort of took pieces in and out. What I tried to do was do it in a way that keyboards took on specific roles rather than lots of keyboards doing lots of different sounds. It was like, okay, so I've got my Triton Pro in the corner. That does some really nice Mellotron string type samples. I'm going to keep a lot of those string sounds over there. It's also going to be some of my low Moog typey synth sounds. Got the little Fatty, which is going to do all the lead stuff. The M3 is going to be a general workhorse of picking up a lot of stuff. I had a CX7 organ, so that was going to pick up all the organ stuff. Had an old T1 that had a nice Rhodes in it, and so you sort of ended up compartmentalizing keyboards into only doing 2 or 3 different things. And it also helped give a roundness to the whole set, so that if you used a string some way, you were keeping a bit of continuity, but also trying to be as faithful to the original records as you could. So that's how I approached it. I tried to go for organs, strings, pianos, and leads, and then a couple of synths that kind of bridged the gap into the more modern era, like the Owners and the Machine Messiahs types of track. And that was really how I approached it, because I thought, I'm going to really struggle if I've got to change 5 sounds for every single song. And what I also tried to do was do the minimal amount of changing between tracks as well, because I'd watched Dad use one of those little MIDI controller things, and this was pre-main stage and taking a laptop on stage easily and pressing a button that way. So and Dad had one of those little buttons where it suddenly fired a MIDI signal through to all the keyboards and changed them. And the amount of times I've watched him get up on stage and that go wrong, I thought we've got to try and find a way that actually just takes the risk element out of the shows. And so that's what we did. And the only real complex thing we tried to do was do the early stages of Pro Tools mixing on stage, and the software wasn't quite up to it. It kept crashing, which is why we went back to an analog desk. So it was quite old school, but good fun. And so that was really the process of trying to build the live set and the live sound. And it worked quite comfortably, because then as we brought new pieces into play, there was already a really good baseline of keyboard sounds that I knew I could rely on. And then we could, add extra things in. And Chris would often, in his way, say, "We've been playing it that way for a while now. Could you put something else in here?" And I remember him doing that on Machine Messiah once, saying, "Oh yeah, but you've got the bell going off there, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "And you've also got that big synth line running down." I said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "Yeah, on the recording, there's also a pad there." And I looked at him and I said, I do only have the 2 hands, Chris. And I can remember to this day, he looked at me and he said, "You'll find a way." So I ended up having to have this sort of pedal mashup where I'd have 2 pedals sellotaped together so that I could find a way of putting my foot sideways on and holding 2 keyboards sustained at the same time whilst playing a third one, so that I could keep the string pad going with the bell with the left hand and the keyboard doing the right hand. I can remember that to this day, him just saying, "Oh, you'll find a way." But I was determined not to do any of it with any samples or pre-recorded bits. Everything that was on stage was played. It was, because that's how I felt comfortable. But yeah,
wonderful.
Happy memories of that.
So what's coming up for you? Are there any plans to rearrange that Touchstone event from where you were going to play some of the material from a page?
Oh, I'd like to at some point. It's until I'm really comfortable knowing that the audiences are there and everything's safe for people to come out and we can do it. I would love to do it, but I'm really not quite sure we're there yet. Not for when you're trying to take a risk on a show. Bigger artists can go out and can draw to a big stadium, but when you're playing smaller clubs in London, which don't have the capacity for people to be distanced as much, I'm still slightly nervous about that. I would love to do it. I'd love to do it, but I think it's still a little bit away for me at the moment. So I'm sort of concentrating on obviously Dark Fables, which actually I never mentioned. You did ask me right at the beginning, which was that this third disc that we put together has come out as a standalone disc now for the people. Because I had a lot of emails from people saying, "Oh, it's brilliant you've done that, but I've already got the first 2 albums, so can I just get that on its own?" So we've done that. So my next thing is doing another box set, which is going to be out early next year, which is a box set of my collaborations with Steve Howe and Gordon Giltrap. So the works that I did with Gordon, the album I did with him is coming out with all the bonus tracks that we did on a disc. And then obviously the one I did with Steve being remastered. And then there's a live album that Gordon and I had recorded that we'd never put out. So we're just doing the mix on that at the moment. So it's going to be a nice sort of package of collaborations of guitarists that I've worked with, which I'm quite looking forward to coming out. So, because a lot of this work that I did was pre-Yes days, and so a lot of the people that know me from working in Yes don't really know about this scope of work prior to that. So it's a good opportunity for somebody to take a punt on a box set and go, oh, I didn't know he did that stuff with Steve. I'll buy that, and then hear the stuff that I did with Gordon. And you give people an opportunity to hear music that they might have otherwise not heard.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I actually got my unused Touchstone ticket out today and had a look at it from 2020. So as soon as you can get that rearranged, I'll be there. But I do understand the concerns that you have.
It's true, but I'd love to play those tracks. I'd love to play "Gift of Love" on stage and "To the Moment" and "Words on the Page." It'd be wonderful. Yes. It was. I got an email from Benoit actually after the From a Page box set came out, and he just said he was so pleased. He said he was so pleased to hear the stuff that we did before Trevor Horn got involved come out. He said I was delighted, and he said, and I sat down with a bunch of buddies. We got a big box of Budweiser. He said, and we listened to Live from Leon. Yeah. And he said it was great, and he was such a nice guy, Ben. Such a good fun to play with, such a great guy.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed once again, Oliver.
Pleasure as always.
We will have you on again. As soon as you get anything else released, we will have you back on, and in the meantime as well, to just talk about all sorts of Yes things. So thank you very much once again.
It was a pleasure. Anytime.
I've heard all Yes Music Podcast.